Welcome to Module 6 of the Tribal Data Toolbox training. And in this module, we are going to demonstrate importing continuous concentration data into the toolbox. So the continuous concentration data files are the ones that we made in the previous module. So the PM 2.5 data file we made in the previous module and the Ozone data file we made in the previous module, we're going to be importing into the toolbox during this module. And also during the import process, we are going to complete the first phase of the data review process. Before I can import the files into the toolbox, I need to move them into the Tribal Data Toolbox _version 3.0 folder. So I'm going to go ahead and open the toolbox import files, and these are the modified files that I made during the previous module. And I am going to start with the Ozone data. So I take this manipulated site s46_ozone.txt file and right click on it and select copy. Then I close this screen. And I am going to go into my Tribal Data Toolbox _version 3.0 folder, and that's always on my hard drive. So I go into the Start menu, Computer, and go into my hard drive and the Tribal Data Toolbox _version 3.0 folder. And then I right click and I select Paste. And now the file is in the folder like it needs to be. The other thing I need to do is I need to rename the file, and the file has to be named exactly new import.txt. That's the only way the toolbox will recognize where the file is. If you call it something else, the toolbox can't find the file. It also always needs to be saved in the Tribal Data Toolbox _version 3.0 folder, because that is where the toolbox looks for the file. So I'm going to right click on the file and select rename. And now I'm just going to type in new import. And it's all one word. Don't put any spaces in it. Okay, make sure I type that in correctly, then I press enter on my keyboard. Now I'm ready to open up the toolbox and import the file. So I'm going to double click like I always do to open up the toolbox on the Tribal Data Toolbox version 3.0 MDB file. I'm going to enter my database password, and we are getting very used to seeing the opening screen of the toolbox. And I'm going to work from the fast track, so I'm going to click on the continuous or meteorological data fast track option. And that opens up this form that we've seen before. So when we entered our QC data, we used this data inflow button. And now when we import our pollutant concentration data, we're also going to use this data inflow form. So I'm going to click on that. And this opens up the screen that you've seen before. And this is where all of the data entry or import functions for continuous and meteorological monitoring can be accessed from. What we did before was enter quality control data. We used this button. This time we're going to use this button, import raw data file from sampler. So I'll click on that and we'll see an exciting new form. So when you import data into the toolbox, data are moved through several different tables, and this is a step-by-step process that goes through several different forms in the toolbox. So when you first import your file, it goes into a temporary data import table. From there, the data are then transferred to another temporary data verification table, and that's where you do your initial flagging of your data and add different units and identifiers to your data. Then once you're done doing that, the data are moved to the permanent data archive table. So the form you are seeing now is the first form in this series that's going to move your data through these tables. And then in this particular first form, we're just going to be moving the data from the text file into your temporary data import table. This form is unlike any of the forms that we've seen up to this point because it's a data import form. The other forms we looked at were data entry forms, and the difference is with the data entry form you actually type in your data. So when you entered your QC checks, we typed in that data into a form. This form is going to import data from an external file. So it's called a data import form. Data input forms are primarily composed of buttons rather than fields. So you'll notice on this particular form, there's two different colored buttons. There's this purple button here, and then there's this gray button here. The purple buttons are primarily single-use buttons. So that means that during the course of a routine data import, you only click on that button once. They have a little radio button next to them so that you can tell that you've clicked on that, but when it's filled in. So when I click on this button, it's going to fill this in as being checked. Sometimes purple buttons might not be used for your data set. So we're going to consult the help file for certain buttons to make sure that you're supposed to press them. In contrast, the gray buttons are multi-use buttons. They allow you to navigate the form, inspect data, or open SOPs, and you can use them as many times as you want during a routine data import. The letters on the buttons correspond with the sequence that you're supposed to follow when you import your data. So you follow that, you go from B to C, and then on the next form will be D, and continuing on. Also in the SOP, each of these letters have a corresponding section in the SOP, so they're easy to find. So if you don't know what this button is doing, you can easily go to the help file and find out what it does. For example, I don't see an A here, so I'm a little confused. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the SOP and see if it says anything about step A. So I'm going to do that. So the SOP opens to step B because that's the first button on the form. But I'm going to scroll up and see if I can find anything about step A. Okay, here it is. Step A. Oh, I see. So step A was the new import.txt file creation. That's what we already did in the previous module. So that's done, and I'm ready to proceed with step B. I'm just going to minimize this so I have it in the background and I can always refer to it. Also, these yellow labels are just labels. You can't click on them and they don't do anything. If you click on them, nothing happens. They're just telling you important information. Like, for example, this one says, okay, make sure your text file's named new import.txt is saved in the Tribal Data Toolbox version 3.0 folder on your C drive. So this is just telling us information. Just have a few more points to make about importing data before we start on this process. And the first point I want to make is that once you begin the process of importing a data file into the toolbox, all of the steps for that data file should be completed at once, rather than completing a few steps at a time, then taking a lunch or shutting down your computer. So in other words, there's steps A through M on these forms, and the steps A through M should all be completed in one interrupted session. Once you get familiar with this process, it really can take as less as 20 minutes to go through it. It's really an easy process, but we do recommend that you have a 2-hour block of time set aside just in case something goes wrong in order for you to complete all the steps in one sitting. Second, we recommend that data be downloaded from the sampler every time you perform a QC check on the sampler. And every 2 weeks is a common interval for doing your QC checks. So if you do your QC checks every week, then you should have downloaded data every 2 weeks that you import into the toolbox. It's easier to manage your data if you have short data sets rather than long ones. So we recommend keeping to that schedule. However, if you don't, you can still import your data sets into the toolbox on a different schedule. The toolbox will accept a huge amount of data at once. You could even import a year's worth of data into the toolbox. However, it is harder to do that because you're going to be doing reviewing of your data, and reviewing a large set of data, a year's worth of data, is kind of difficult. It's easier to look at smaller data sets. Also remember that the toolbox functions are optimized when the results of the QC checks are entered before the pollutant data are imported. That allows you to flag any of your concentration data based on a failing QC check. We totally recommend entering your QC data before you import your data. Again, if you can't do that, you can still import your data first. It's just not the recommended sequence of steps.